Hi, folks. I hope you can hear me. It's not entirely clear why, but I was just having a bit of trouble getting the live stream going just then. Spinning wheel of death for a while, which is a bit unnerving. Anyway, refresh the page and that seemed to work. So let's try and share screen. Okie dokie. Great. So yeah, so sorry, slightly later than I had hoped to be online. It's now 53 minutes past 5, and I was ready to roll at 50 minutes past 5. If any of you are struggling to hear me or to see my face in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen with a lovely image of the sun rising over the Giza plateau, if any of you are struggling either with hearing or seeing me, please let me know. I'm slightly nervous that things are not working well today. But anyway, let's assume for now that that they are. Luna says all fine, and Amy says I see and hear you. Gillian says seeing you just fine. Thank you all. Okay, great. All right. Maybe panic over, hopefully. So thanks very much for joining me. Thank you especially to channel members, Ambassador channel members. Terrific to have you here, especially. Thank you for joining. Really appreciate your support. As always, we're going to be doing pyramid myth busting today. And well, I'm always nervous about these things because I always feel like there's things I've forgotten. I really fear I've taken on too much today. Because I'm worried that there are things that people might expect to be in a talk like this about pyramid myth busting that I haven't included, and yet I've got way too many slides probably. So yeah, who knows what that's going to mean. Preliminaries before the talk gets going. So for those of you who are listening in live, you will know it's now 5 minutes to 6. So about 5 more minutes worth of chat before we get going with the talk. If you're watching the recording, you're going to need to scroll forward about 7 minutes because I started slightly behind schedule to get to the talk itself. Those of us who are here in advance for the live session like a little bit of chat. It's a good old lockdown tradition. Can we talk about that sort of thing now in those terms? Lockdown traditions seems a bit strange. I guess we can smile about it now. But at the time it was terrible, as the Smiths once said. Yeah, okay, so pyramid myth busting. I wanted to do something like this for a long time, and working on a TV series that was loosely based on this sort of theme earlier this year gave me the kick in the backside that I needed to get this going. And I hope, well, I hope it will meet your expectations. So thank you very much for coming, all of you. There's lots of chat already, which is great to see. Hello to you all. Hello. Amy and Gillian, thanks again for just letting me know that all the tech seems to be working at the moment. Hello, Sylvia. Hi, Jill. Good to have you back. Hello, Luna. Hi, Linda. Good to have you back too. Linda, I'm afraid your husband may appear in this talk, and I didn't ask permission. Sorry about that. I suppose it's an occupational hazard. If you come to Egypt with me, you'll know that I'm waving a camera around all the time, and you will probably already know, perhaps if you know my talks, you'll know that my groups sometimes crop up in such things. So yeah, Linda, if you spot Adrian, or if he's even there, hello to both of you. I hope that's okay. Very useful for scale. Hi, Bettina. I owe you an email, don't I? I think, yes. Sorry about that. I will get back to my emails. I've been frantically prepping this talk for the last few days. Hello, David on the train. Good to have you here. I'm always amazed that anybody can watch anything like this on the train. Every so often I hear somebody say something like, "Oh, I'm going to watch this. Or I'm going to watch the football on the train." It never works for me. Anyway, I hope it does work for you, David. Hi, Jamie. Hello, Jamie over in Jersey. I was thinking of you, Jamie, because I went to see Bruce Springsteen at Wembley the other day. Is there a more famous person to have come from New Jersey? I don't know. Anyway, I was thinking of you and thinking of the lovely Enjoy New Jersey bag that you gave me when I was out there last time. So good to have you back. I think this is probably a slightly more sociable hour for you than it was the last time we were both in a virtual space like this together. Hi, Audrey. Yeah, that's a Smiths reference. Only those of a particular vintage will appreciate. What is that song, Audrey? We can smile about it now, but at the time it was terrible. I have to have a think. Hello, Glenn. Nice to have you here. Hello, Anne. Just went to the King Tut touring exhibit that was in Washington, DC. It was really fantastic. Oh, great. Excellent. Bit of King Tut in this talk. I can't stop myself, clearly. Hello, Chakalakak. Crikey. I hope I'm not egregiously mispronouncing a name there. Anyway, hello, David. Hello, Helen. Hi, VB. Hi, Elisa. Thank you all for coming. So we've got a minute to go. I have no idea how long this talk is going to take. I'll try and confine myself to between an hour and an hour and a half, but I'm really nervous about this one. Oh, God. At least you know this is going to be recorded and available straight after the session. That's something I'm supposed to say. Yes, so the recording, as with the last couple I've done via YouTube, will be available straight afterwards. So if you miss anything, or you have to leave, or your internet connection goes down, or you miss the start, or whatever it is, you can catch up straight away. Rewatch to your heart's content if that's the thing that you want to know. Amy says, Shakespeare's sister. Is it? Blimey, did you know that off the top of your head, Amy? Better knowledge of Smith's lyrics than me. They sit in my head, but I don't know the songs. Right. Okay, we better get going, hadn't we? Because I've got so much to get through. I should say, folks, I'm not going to keep an eye on the chat as I go through my slides. So do feel free to pop questions and comments in there during the talk if you like, but please bear in mind that I won't deal with them until the end. I will do my best to go back through the chat looking for questions and things. But actually, it is a bit easier for me if you save them until the end. Anyway, I'll try and get to everything at some point. Righty-ho, folks, welcome. Pyramid myth busting. As I mentioned in the prelims, this is a subject that I've been meaning to deal with for quite a long time. Really, I got the final sort of nudge earlier this year when I was working on a TV series, Mysteries of the Pyramids with Dara Ó Briain, the stand-up comedian Dara Ó Briain, who's also very knowledgeable and bright guy and knows a lot about things like astronomy, which wasn't altogether irrelevant to the things we were talking about in our pyramid series. The aim of that series really was to give a little bit of time to some of the less conventional theories about the pyramids, what they're for, how they were built, when they were built, etc., but to show that the consensus view, based on decades, centuries worth of archaeological research on the part of hundreds and more specialists, and the accumulation of evidence and knowledge and interpretations, which brings us to the consensus view that pyramids, in the case of Giza, are tombs of the 4th dynasty, is still the best explanation we have for the what and the how and the when, etc. And we didn't really have enough time, I felt, in the TV series to go through the evidence, and that's really what gave me the nudge. I thought, okay, if I'm going to go over this, then we're going to do it in a talk. And so that is what I'm going to try to do today. It's going to be very evidence heavy, and probably lighter on the theory, heavier on the evidence. That seems to me to be the right way for an Egyptologist, archaeologist to do things. And I hope it doesn't seem as though I'm labouring any of these points. But anyway, you can let me know when we get to the end. Righty-ho. So a little bit of an overview, first of all. And I should say that although the title of the talk is Pyramid Myth Busting, I am very much going to be focusing on Giza today, and mostly on the Great Pyramid of Khufu, to some extent the other monuments at the site, and to some extent other pyramids elsewhere as well. But really the focus is going to be on Khufu, fourth dynasty, and specifically his pyramid. I'll say now there's going to be a whole heck of a lot that I'm not going to get through today, and there was a lot more that I would have liked to have put in here, but maybe we'll do a part 2, something like that. Again, you can let me know in the comments. So just a quick overview of the site before we go any further. So apologies if this is all a bit simplistic. This is the Giza plateau, looking out from that point in the sort of southwest of the archaeological area where visitors are taken now, so they can get a nice snap of all 3 pyramids with Cairo behind. So we're looking roughly, oh golly, it says northwest here. We're not. We're looking sort of northeast. We're in the southwest corner. So the three main pyramids are here, left to right. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, the pyramid in the middle is that of Khafra, and at the right hand end Menkaura. You might just about be able to make out another little bit of archaeology towards the edge of the slide to the right there. The main 3 pyramids, the ones we're going to be concentrating on here, Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaura. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is the biggest. It's the biggest at the site, and it's the biggest anywhere in Egypt. It appears in photographs like this one to be smaller than the Pyramid of Khafra. That's just the angle this is taken from, and the fact that Khafra's pyramid is built on slightly higher ground. So it usually does appear to be sort of central and the tallest, which gives the whole look of the site from certain angles like this one a nice kind of symmetry. But you have to trust me, Khufu is the biggest of the 3. The other most famous of all the, and there are thousands of them, monuments at Giza, of course, is the Sphinx, the Great Sphinx, this statue which is cut from the living rock, lion's body, human head of a pharaoh wearing a Nemes headdress, formerly had a Uraeus serpent diadem and a false beard, divine beard, as well. We date this, most of us, to the reign of Khafra, the builder of the middle pyramid. It's very much a part of the sort of architectural design unity of this part of the Giza plateau. There's still arguments about that sort of thing, but generally speaking, we're clear it's a 4th dynasty monument, and most of us would say that it's an image of King Khafra. So this is a satellite view of the Giza plateau. As you can see, rather unsettlingly, not only is the modern settlement of it's really the giant sprawl of Cairo, which has now swallowed up what 100 years or so ago was the village of Giza. It's now a city in its own right, but it's now continuous with Cairo. So this is part of Greater Cairo on the right-hand side of the slide. Coming right up to the base of the plateau, the base of the sort of escarpment. So the pyramids are built on this natural higher ground above the Nile Valley, and as you can see, the sprawl is now making its way around the west of the site as well. And if I zoomed out, you could see that in fact the archaeological area is becoming a bit of an island, which is, as I say, a little bit unsettling. But at least at the moment, if you're looking westwards, because of the lie of the land, it's quite difficult to see those settlements in the west. So it still looks as though, if you look at the pyramids in a westerly direction, as though there's nothing behind them. But as you can see here, there's very much quite a lot of modern development there. And if we superimpose a plan of the site from Porter and Moss, the topographical bibliography of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic text, reliefs, and paintings, I often use their maps and plans because they're excellent, and we get a sense of the lie of the land archaeologically. Zooming in, there are the 3 pyramids. I hope you can see those well enough, with the modern tarmac road snaking in and around them, conveying tourists to the Great Pyramid at the top, Pyramid of Khafra in the middle, the Sphinx down the slope to the right. Then it disappears off into the west and towards the south, towards that viewpoint where that first photograph was taken. And as you can see, again, this is the same plan from Porter and Moss. In addition to the pyramids themselves, the pyramids are part of wider pyramid complexes. So the standard design for a pyramid complex by this point was the pyramid itself, with a cult building, a temple, on the east face. The entrances are in the north. The temple to the east we call the pyramid temple, imaginatively. These then are joined by a causeway, a linear route descending down the slope of the plateau towards the Nile Valley. And these then meet a second cult building temple we call the Valley Temple. And in the case of the pyramids of Khafra and Menkaura, those temples have survived and have been investigated archaeologically. You can visit the Valley Temple of Khafra. You can't visit the Menkaura Temple, but it was thoroughly investigated by Reisner at the beginning of the 20th century. The Valley Temple of Khufu has now disappeared underneath the modern settlement, as has half the causeway. The remains of it were discovered about 20 or 30 years ago during the digging of some trenches for waterworks in the area. A hard dark stone pavement was discovered, which must be the remains of that Valley Temple. It's in exactly the right spot on the alignment with the processional route. There are also subsidiary pyramids connected to the three main pyramids. Three connected to the Pyramid of Khufu. They belong to female members of the royal family, queens. A similar situation in the case of the Menkaura pyramid. And in fact, that little, what appeared like a little mini pyramid off at the right of the slide, when we saw that first view out looking northeast across the Giza plateau, that was one of those queen's pyramids. There is just a single satellite pyramid in the case of the Khafra pyramid on the south side. So altogether, there are 10 pyramids at Giza. But it's very much the three main ones, which are the funerary monuments of the kings, that we're concentrating on here. Aside from the pyramids and the associated buildings, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of other monuments of various kinds clustered around the pyramids. Most of these are tombs of one kind or another, which either take the form of rock cut tombs cut into the sides of the cliffs down in the lower parts of the plateau, in particular around the area of the Khufu Causeway, the Khafra Causeway as well, and towards the bottom of the Menkaura Causeway in the area of the Workmen's Village, which we'll come to in a bit. Otherwise, the tombs mostly take the form of what we call mastabas. Mastaba is an Arabic word for a kind of a bench, like a low platform. You see these in front of traditional houses in Egypt. They're the sort of seat where people will sit and while the day away, speaking to passers-by, etc., etc. They are essentially a low platform, and so this word was given to these much larger monumental tombs because they are formed, the superstructures of these cuboid rectangular platforms, and there are hundreds, as I say, if not thousands of these surrounding the pyramids. Once, of course, a king chooses to build his funerary monument in a place like this, it creates a sacred space, and that means that a premium comes to be attached to the area, and it's then a splendid honor and privilege to have your own tomb built in that area. And the closer you can get to your king's pyramid, the better. So hence the clustering of all these tombs in what are known to archaeologists now as the West Field, to the west of Khufu's pyramid, the East Field to the east, the Central Field, which is to the south of the Khufu pyramid and to the east of Khafra's pyramid, and there's a south field as well, and various other sort of sub-cemeteries, but those are the main three. This reconstruction from Frank Monnier and David Lightbody's brilliant book, The Haynes Manual, The Great Pyramid, which is full of great illustrations, gives you a sense of what the pyramid complex of Khufu would have looked like if you could get up into the air, sort of bird's eye view of it, reconstructed. So you can see the pyramid there, subsidiary Queen's pyramids to the south of the causeway leading from the Pyramid Temple down off the plateau itself into the Nile Valley, connecting with the Valley Temple, which itself was probably connected to the water of the River Nile somehow. And then either side, behind the pyramid to the west and in front of it to the east here, rows and rows of mastaba tombs of the elite officials of the day. So our first question is, when were they built? And for this section, actually, I'm really going to be concentrating on when the Khufu pyramid was built. when this monument was built. And this is the purpose of this is to address the first of these myths, if you like, what I call myths, which is this idea that possibly the consensus view that the Great Pyramid was built by Pharaoh Khufu as his funerary monument during the 4th dynasty is in fact wrong. So the traditional view is very much that this is a monument of the 4th dynasty. Egyptian history, ancient history, divided up into 30 dynasties, according to the history written by Manetho in the early Ptolemaic. Egyptologists group these dynasties together into larger chunks of history, beginning with the early dynastic. That's usually thought to comprise the 1st and 2nd dynasties, sometimes the 3rd. The Old Kingdom, 4th, 5th, and 6th, sometimes also the 3rd as here. First intermediate period is the 7th to 10th and half of the 11th. Then you've got a Middle Kingdom, second half of the 11th and into the 12th, little bit of the 13th possibly as well. Second intermediate period, New Kingdom, third intermediate period, late period, and then the ages after Manetho's time, during which the country was ruled by Alexander the Great's successors, the Ptolemies, then the Romans, Roman Empire, and finally Byzantine Empire, before we get to the Arab conquest. So the 4th dynasty, the time when the Giza plateau was the focus of the construction of these great pyramids, actually comes relatively early on in dynastic history. The Old Kingdom is sometimes described as the Pyramids Age. It's not, as we'll see, the only time during Egyptian history when pyramids were constructed, but it is the sort of classic age. And it's the time when the Pyramid of Khufu was built, and that is the biggest, the most solid, the most precisely constructed, and the most sophisticated internally as well. So appropriate, I think, to call the Old Kingdom the Pyramids Age. So we associate this pyramid with Pharaoh Khufu, whose name is written in a cartouche in hieroglyphs on the left-hand side. This cartouche actually is a much later writing of the name. It's from the 19th dynasty, from the Abydos king list in the Temple of Seti I. But I just put it up here so you get a sense of his name and how it's written. In this case, just with 3 hieroglyphic signs, the hooked H, the F, and the quailed chick W, which altogether gives us this name, Khufu. The 4th dynasty, incidentally, I always say this, I shy away from absolute dates, but if you think of the 4th dynasty as having taken place around 2550 to 2400 BC, you won't be too far wrong. There are lots of ways in which we can't quite be sure precisely about when it took place, but that'll give you a sort of approximate idea of when this was. So if we think of the 4th dynasty as having taken place about 4,500 years ago, that's roughly right. So why do we associate Khufu with the Great Pyramid? You'll often hear people saying there's no reason to associate Khufu with the Great Pyramid. There are no inscriptions, or there are hardly any inscriptions, and this isn't good enough. Well, let's look at what evidence there is for this. Many of you will know that the name Khufu, the pyramid is largely indeed uninscribed. In fact, it is essentially uninscribed, as monuments were at this time, uninscribed. But the name Khufu does appear in an informal inscription more than once in the relieving chambers, which lie above the burial chamber in the center of the pyramid. Pyramid of Khufu is not quite unique, but unusual in that the burial compartments are within the main structure of the pyramid. For the most part, both before and after Khufu's time, with 1 or 2 other exceptions, the burial chambers are underneath the pyramid, or at least at the very base. And this is one of the ways in which the Pyramid of Khufu is, as I mentioned, probably the most sophisticated. It's very difficult to construct a pyramid with chambers in the center of it without them collapsing in on themselves because of the huge weight of stone around them. But the Egyptians of this time conceived various devices to distribute the force of the weight of blocks around the burial chamber. Although cracks did appear in the ceiling, nonetheless, it has survived intact. And one of the ways in which they achieved that was to construct these so-called relieving chambers above it, which help alleviate the burden of the weight around the top. And as you can see, there's a pented roof at the very top of these chambers, which we see in the drawing on the left-hand side. This is from the Weiss and Perring publication, I think, if you know that. So very helpfully arranging the forces of the rock around the burial chamber, which is at the bottom here. And in those relieving chambers were found on the blocks some informal inscriptions left behind by the workmen who were responsible for the construction of the pyramid. And they include this is the best known brief phrase, Aparu Semeru Khufu, here, the work gang of the companions of Khufu. And Khufu's name, as you can see, is written in a cartouche, this time more fully spelt out with 4 hieroglyphic signs, hooked H, the W, F, and another W, Khufu. And this is the sort of starting point, if you like, for associating the pyramid of Khufu. So what's happened here is that these blocks have been inscribed with the name of the gang who was responsible for moving them into position, presumably. This is one of a whole series of inscriptions, informal inscriptions, graffiti like this, which mention the gangs of workmen. There are various names for the various different gangs, often invoking the name of the king concerned. This is true of the Great Pyramid and also of other pyramids, not only at Giza, but also at places like Abu Sir. And they are arranged in the relieving chamber. I think this is Campbell's chamber, the so-called Campbell's chamber. They each have a name after somebody who first visited them or something like that. And they include the name of the king. On this basis, it's not a lot. It's fair enough to say it's not a lot, but on this basis, this is a good reason to associate the pyramid with the king. As I say, there are a lot more of these than perhaps is sometimes claimed. It's sometimes said that there's just the one. Actually, there are quite a lot. And in the case of the Great Pyramid, they relate to Khufu. But as I say, there are lots of these elsewhere. This list here, which I'm afraid you're probably not going to see terribly well, comes in fact from Rice's publication of the Pyramid of Menkaura, Mycerinus. He uses the Greek name in the name of the publication. And Alan Rowe, who was the linguist and philologist expert working on this aspect of the material in the Menkaura excavations, collected together all of these from the various different pyramids at Giza and also elsewhere, was able to show that there are a number of instances of work gangs invoking the name of Khufu, but also other kings in other places elsewhere. And all of this together is a pretty good sort of first piece of evidence, if you like, to associate such and such a pyramid with one king and such another pyramid with a different king and such a different pyramid with another king. So that's our sort of starting point, if you like. And people often say that isn't it strange that there are no other inscriptions inside the pyramid, and Khufu's name only appears as a graffito, and it's hidden away. The relieving chambers were only really a device to prevent the burial chamber from collapsing in on itself. All of the compartments inside the pyramid, of course, would have been off limits once the tomb was sealed, but these especially were never meant to be seen. But Khufu's is nonetheless the only name inscribed there. So it's not as though there's competition in that sense. The other thing is that monumental tombs at this time are generally not inscribed, and that goes not only for the tombs of kings but also for tombs of the elite, and that had been the case since the early dynastics, since the first dynasty. So it's not only pyramids, but the monumental tombs of the elite as well, these great mastaba tombs. They are occasionally inscribed. There are exceptions, but the vast majority of them are not. And when it comes to identifying the owners of these tombs, we're usually dependent on other things, such as associated material, which is inscribed. But often, actually, if you look at not just the pyramids, but the monumental tombs of the first, second, and third dynasties, places like Saqqara is probably the single best site, you'll find actually that a lot of these tombs, which must have belonged to incredibly important people, they are undeniably tombs. They contain burials and grave goods and etc., 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 cult places, place for the burial of the body, etc., etc. They simply don't contain the inscriptions that we get from later periods that allow us to identify the owners. So actually, it's not really shouldn't be so surprising, perhaps, if we don't get inscriptions in the pyramid of Khufu. We don't generally get texts like that in royal tombs until the end of the 5th dynasty, One exception to that, by the way, is the step pyramid of Joseph from the beginning of the Third Dynasty, which is decorated with his name here and there. But most of the other pyramids we have for the Third Dynasty, Fourth Dynasty, and most of the Fifth are all uninscribed. So it's not that unusual. What do we know about the Fourth Dynasty? As I mentioned, the whole idea of dynasties comes down to us from this historian Manetho, an Egyptian writing in Greek, which was the kind of lingua franca of his day. Lingua franca, that's what I'm trying to say. Of his day, early Ptolemaic. We're not quite sure when he was writing, but probably around the time of Ptolemy II, possibly as late as Ptolemy III. We don't have his original text. We only have sort of echoes of it in copies made by other scholars much later on. But nonetheless, it seems large parts of it were preserved, and crucially, his list of the names of kings grouped into these dynasties. The idea of a dynasty being a line of rulers like this appears to be Manetho's innovation. That name otherwise means something like power in Greek, but he uses it for the first time to describe these lines of rulers. And he gives us this list of names for the Fourth Dynasty, including Soris, Sufis, Mencheres, Ratoises, etc. These are Greek forms of the earlier Egyptian names. He also gives us little nuggets of information here and there where they seem pertinent or where the information was available. And so, for example, for the second king of his Fourth Dynasty, Manetho tells us that Sufis reared the Great Pyramid, which Herodotus tells us was built by Cheops. Sufis conceived a contempt for the gods. He also composed the sacred book, which I acquired in my visit to Egypt because of its high renown. Now, Manetho, we can see by comparison with the archaeological evidence, is sometimes right and sometimes not so right. But actually, this is an interesting kind of echo here. And it's interesting also that he mentions, of course, that Herodotus has it as the name as being Cheops for the builder of the Great Pyramid, which is much closer to being a kind of Greek form of the original Egyptian name, Khufu. And we marry up the names in Manetho to the archaeological evidence as follows. And the correspondence between the names of the Fourth Dynasty as given in Manetho and the archaeological evidence is not easy to see. We think Sufis, on the basis of this mention that he was the builder of the Great Pyramid, is Khufu. Rarjedef is Mencheres, Khafra is Ratoises, Menkaura is Bichares, and then by the end of the dynasty with Shepseskaf, then there's a closer sort of correspondence in the name, Sebacheres. If you look into Dynasty 5, the correspondence gets a little bit clearer. Usakaf becomes Usakeres, Sahura, Sefres, Neferekara, Neferkeres, etc., etc. So for some reason, there's a little bit of a sort of discrepancy in the Fourth Dynasty, but nonetheless, we think that correspondence is probably right. And if we look at a different king list, a much earlier king list than Manetho's, the king list from the 19th dynasty, this is from the Temple of Seti I, we see a list of kings which we're led to believe by the Ramessides goes back to the beginning of time. Their intention, Seti I and Prince Ramesses, later Ramesses II, is to legitimize themselves. And they came from a line that had only recently become established as the royal family in Egypt. They were seeking to legitimize themselves by showing their names at the end of a long list of kings going back to the beginning of history. And we understand those names to correspond to a kind of incomplete list. But we've got names for Dynasty 1, Dynasty 2, Dynasty 3, and Dynasty 4 seems to be reasonably intact. And here it is in sequence. So Sneferu, who we believe to be the builder of pyramids at Meidum and Dashur. Khufu, we believe to be the builder of the Great Pyramid. Jenefra, who appears to have moved the royal cemetery a little way to the north and east to the site of Abu Rawash. Then Khafra, who returned to Giza, Menkaura at Giza, and Shepseskaf, who returned to the site of the very first pyramid at Saqqara. And when we look at the way that pyramids have evolved and the Giza landscape has evolved, and we look at the material associated with those pyramids at Giza and elsewhere, they are a nice correlation with this sequence of kings, and in fact with the kings before and after this period as well. So the idea of Khufu being the builder of this pyramid, which architecturally in terms of design fits nicely into the sequence, appears to match quite nicely the king list that we have. We also have mentions of Khufu and his pyramid elsewhere at Giza, not in the pyramid itself, but although it wasn't the way things were done for the royal tombs to be inscribed, as I mentioned, until the end of the 5th dynasty, non-royal tombs were, of course, inscribed. This is, in fact, a pyramid from the time of the 6th dynasty. This is the master of a man called Ka. It's one of the ones that you can visit. You can buy a ticket to go and visit. This is a part of the tomb where, as is quite common, you get the name of the king, the name of the tomb owner, and also a series of their titles. This one invokes the name of the pyramid town of Khufu, which we can see here. So Ka was in fact the Imi Newt, the overseer of the pyramid town Akhet Khufu. And Akhet Khufu is the pyramid complex, or the town associated with the pyramid complex. And if you look closely here, you'll see that the words Akhet Khufu appears first in the sequence due to honorific transposition. It's the most important part of the phrase. The Akhet is written with a little pyramid determinative sign, as is the newt part at the end here as well. So Imi means overseer, and then the newt, that circular sign with a little semicircular T sign underneath it, is then followed at the right hand end by another pyramid sign. So it's absolutely clear that the Akhet Khufu and the Imi newt make reference to the pyramid here. So there's a clear reference to these as having been part of Khufu's funerary provision. Interestingly enough, this same individual Ka also had responsibility at other parts of the necropolis as well, including with relation to the pyramid of Khafra, which is named the Wer Khafra. Khafra is great. Menkaura, whose pyramid complex is called Netri Menkaura. Menkaura is divine. And also the pyramid complex of Pepi I, which is actually at Saqqara. Pepi's pyramid is called Meri Ra Men Nefer. Fun fact, Men Nefer, which means enduring and beautiful. Meri Ra Pepi I is enduring and beautiful. Men Nefer came to be a byword, a kind of secondary name for the city of Memphis. Men Nefer eventually came to be corrupted in Coptic. The Coptic form of the word was Manphe, and it's from that we get the Greek form Memphis. This pyramid, in fact, eventually gives its name to the city. It's the name that we use today, the Greek version of that word. Fun fact. In addition to the inscriptional mentions of Khufu in association with the Great Pyramid, of course, we have masses of other kinds of archaeological evidence. Most importantly, even if some of us might sometimes think pottery is a bit boring, masses and masses of ceramics. And over the last couple of centuries, archaeologists have gathered, it must be millions and billions of fragments of ceramics from Giza and everywhere, all over Egypt. Pottery is absolutely universal. It was used at all periods in copious quantities. And that's allowed Egyptologists and archaeologists to develop a very rich and robust sequence of vessel types. In terms of form and fabric. So in other words, the shapes they took and what they were made from, both of those things sort of changed subtly over time. And as a result of that, ceramicists, the experts, can take a single sort of sherd, provided you've got usually need a rim or a base. You can say something about the date of that. And the vast quantities of ceramics that have turned up in and around the pyramid of Khufu and elsewhere at Giza confirm the dating of these pyramids as belonging to Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaura. And much of this material has been recovered by archaeologists like Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass, and I've made copious reference during this presentation to their recent-ish book, 2017, Giza and the Pyramids, which is a real doorstep volume, but it is the last word on the archaeology of Giza. Both of them have spent decades working all over the site, gathering material of all kinds. And as they say here, from as far as we could reach, lying on our sides on the bedrock floor beside the Sphinx, we have retrieved fragments of material characteristic of the Old Kingdom. It is everywhere at Giza, even filling the interstices between stones in the pyramids, where we have seen pottery embedded in the mortar. In other words, the detritus, which more than any other kind of archaeological object allows us to date archaeological sites, the ceramics, from all over Giza, confirm the dating of the Sphinx and the pyramids as being from the 4th dynasty, and specifically the reigns of those 3 kings, Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure. I've already just obliquely mentioned the fact that the pyramid of Khufu sits quite nicely in the sequence of pyramid evolution. So we can date these pyramids individually according to, if not inscriptions actually in them, then inscriptions associated with them. So in the case of the Khufu pyramid, the graffiti, the tombs around and about, other inscribed material that's been discovered. And the same goes for other pyramids as well. We can then look at the king lists to see in which order those kings should be arranged. And we have Manetho, we have the Abydos king lists, Turin Canon, various other king lists. We have the ceramics, and we, as I mentioned, we have the seriation that allows us to see the development of ceramics and to compare material recovered from the different places. That allows us to put these things into sequence, and all those things allow us to confirm what we would probably already be able to deduce from the way that pyramids evolved over time. So the first pyramid, and we'll look at this a little bit in more detail slightly later on. The first pyramid at the top left here, the step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, quite clearly, just from the pyramid itself, evolved out of one of these monumental mastaba tombs, a rectangular platform monument. And quite simply, over time, this platform was enlarged, and then after a certain point, a series of smaller platforms placed on top of it, creating a stepped monument, a stepped pyramid. And we have a series of stepped monuments like these, which in sequence eventually begin to exhibit signs that the Egyptians were trying to create from them true pyramids, straight-sided true pyramids. And as you can see a little bit of the sort of evolution of that here. So it's the step pyramid at the top left. The pyramid of Meidum was intended to be a true pyramid, but at its core is another stepped monument. Then you start to get the truer pyramids, beginning with Snefru's so-called bent pyramid at Dahshur, then the Great Pyramid of Khufu, far left in the middle row, Khafra, Menkaure, and then after that, following the trend that begins at Giza, pyramids start to get smaller, and to some extent corners are cut in construction as well. And that is why the pyramids of Saqqara, Niuserra and Djedkar Izezi, which we see along the bottom row there, are smaller and less solidly constructed. So again, this allows us to see quite nicely where that pyramid of Khufu fits in. And even if we didn't have any inscriptions or any ceramics, we would still probably place that particular pyramid at this point in that sequence. And despite all of this, there are still sensationalist ideas out there, alternative ideas, theories, that these could be much older. And there are 2 main theories which in the past have led to the suggestion that the pyramids in the Sphinx, the monuments at Giza, could be much older. And the idea that the evidence we've just been talking about, inscriptions in the pyramid, around the pyramid, the ceramics, the evolution, etc., for people for whom that is not enough, that's not good enough, these theories, which offer an alternative explanation, kind of open the door to a radical revision of the consensus view. One of these is the so-called Orion correlation theory, which really got going in the 1990s. And the idea of this is that if you look at the 3 pyramids in plan, they roughly form a line, a kind of diagonal in this view, with north at the top. They're a sort of diagonal line running top right to bottom left, if you like. And this line with a slight kink in it appears to be similar to or the same as the arrangement of the 3 stars in Orion's belt and the constellation of stars. The trouble is that looked at from a certain position within the pyramid, and this relates to these enigmatic shafts within the pyramid, they can't be seen in the right position today, and indeed they couldn't be seen in the right position. They couldn't have been seen in the right position in the 4th dynasty. But if you sort of wind the clock backwards to a time when the Earth's axis was in a slightly different point which meant that the night sky looked slightly different. If you wind the clock back to the point at which those shafts and the night sky line up, you find that you're not in the 4th dynasty, but several thousand years before that. Which leads to this idea that, you know, maybe that, you know, they were intended to reflect the night sky, but by people who were building them much, much earlier. In fact, however, and I'm neither a surveyor nor an astronomer, but if you follow the literature on this and what specialists in those fields, survey and astronomy, have said, although the alignments are similar, they aren't the same, in fact. And the angle of this kink in the middle isn't, in fact, the same. It's close, but, you know, it's not the same. And crucially, if you look up at the night sky and then you look at the pyramids in plan, in fact, they are a mirror image of each other. They're not the same, which rather seems to sort of be a bit of an issue for the theory. Meanwhile, is there an alternative explanation for the placement of the pyramids? Well, yes, of course there is. They follow the topography of the Giza plateau. And Giza was most probably selected in the first place because it was an area of natural high ground in the vicinity of the capital city of Memphis, which afforded a good view of these gargantuan monuments from the city and also from Heliopolis. And in the 4th dynasty, as is reflected in the names of kings, the cult of the sun god was becoming increasingly important. It's the name of the sun god Ra that appears at the end of the name Khaif Ra and Menkau Ra and Jedef Ra for that matter as well. And it's for that reason probably that the royal cemetery moves northwards from Saqqara up to Giza and also to Abu Roash in that little brief period in between Khufu and Khafra's reign. The pyramids of Saqqara cannot be seen from Heliopolis because of the lie of the land in the Nile Valley, but they can be seen from Heliopolis if you go further north. And then the Giza Plateau itself, that convenient area of high ground, with the way the slope drops down to the Nile Valley, doesn't give you a huge amount of scope in where you place your pyramid. And it would be absolutely natural for the first of those to be in the position at the sort of top right, if you like, of the plateau, and then for the next pyramid to sort of occupy a space just slightly to the south and west of it, and for the next pyramid in the sequence to go south and west of that. And that happens to form a line that looks a little bit like the Orion's belt, but it's probably much more to do just with topography and intervisibility. The other theory, which has in the past, again in the 1990s mainly, given rise to this idea that the monuments at Giza might be much older, is the Sphinx. I've called it the Sphinx erosion theory. I'm not sure it has a particular name here, but the idea began with the observation based on the geology of the Sphinx that this strange sort of weathering pattern around its body could only have been caused by rainfall. Wind wouldn't do it. It could only be rainfall, and of course Egypt is generally dry. There's not a lot of rain in Egypt. There was, however, a lot of rain. If you go far enough back in geological time, if you go back more like 10 or 12,000 years rather than the 4 we need to go back to get to the 4th dynasty, then perhaps the climate would have been suitable. There would have been plenty of rain, and this would bring about the weathering. In fact, however, since that time, while geologists got quite excited about that idea, other geologists now have argued that, well, in fact, no, it does rain from time to time in Egypt, and more importantly, when it does rain, it rains in very significant quantities. And there would not only be the impact of the drops of rain itself on a monument like the Sphinx, but also the runoff. That's the important thing. And the runoff, in fact, is most probably what caused the weathering in these places. And of course, the weathering is not only visible on the Sphinx; it's visible in on the stone in lots of other buildings as well. Not just the pyramids, the mastaba tombs, most of which are much more clearly identifiable with people and particular periods. And all of this consistently has weathered the same way. And on that basis, actually, you'd have to say that, well, that ties the Sphinx and its geology much more closely to, say, the monumental mastaba tombs of the central mastaba field, which again are Old Kingdom in date, based on ceramics, inscriptions, etc., etc. So that theory is most probably can be discounted as well. So myth 1 of 4 is that the pyramids are much older than Egyptologists believe, and there's no evidence to associate them with Dynasty 4. Well, in fact, I think you can now disregard those two main arguments There is otherwise pretty much no archaeological or other kinds of evidence to associate the pyramids and the Sphinx with earlier times. We would have to assume that the people who built them otherwise left absolutely no trace. Meanwhile, there are vast quantities of evidence to associate the pyramids and the Sphinx with the fourth dynasty, not just with those kings, but with all of the other people who we can identify who were involved in their construction. So altogether, the evidence seems fairly conclusive that the consensus view that they were built during the fourth dynasty should be maintained. So on how they were built, what do we know? Well, we know quite a lot about stone cutting in general. We have lots and lots of pictorial evidence from things like tomb scenes, if not for the working of stone for the construction of pyramids, then for the working of stone for other purposes. So this happens to be a tomb that I visited not long ago, which this is the tomb of Neankhnum and Khnum-Hotep of the 5th dynasty at Saqqara. There's some lovely scenes of the cutting of statues. Here we have abundant evidence of statues, stone vessels, various other stone items which are securely dated through inscriptions and associated material, again, to the Old Kingdom before and afterwards. We in fact have tools. There are some more depictions here. This is from the tomb of Rekhmirah, later New Kingdom scene, but cutting and dressing of stone blocks. We have a scene here from the 6th dynasty, slightly later than the construction of the pyramids at Giza, evidence for the use of tubular tools. A few years ago, some experimental archaeology was done. It's often said that the Egyptians certainly could not have achieved the kind of circular cutting that we see in stone vessels or the production of various other things that have appeared in the archaeology. And this experimental archaeology using the materials that the Egyptians would have had access to, that's cylindrical copper drills, and then also fragments of quartz and granite, which are used as a kind of abrasive to grind the surfaces down. They allowed this team to create in a hard stone, in granite in this case, cylindrical cuts, just like you see here, which leave behind these cylindrical cores, which people often say the Egyptians couldn't have achieved. But it's clear that with the tools they had, and based on the depictions we have in tombs, they certainly could achieve the things that the archaeology shows they could. For this TV series I was working on a little while ago, we had a team show us some stone cutting, and I can tell you it's mighty impressive. The skill that they have in identifying sort of faults in the rock and then exploiting those, very, very quickly able to slice open huge chunks of limestone, in this case, just with the right knowledge of how the stone behaves. It's kind of amazing to us to see. And of course we have quarries as well, where not only can we see that that very large areas have been worked, but they leave behind the sort of telltale signs of exactly how large stones were being extracted as well. So I don't know how well you can see this, but you can see here little sort of linear stretches of cuttings in the rock, which are the points at which faults or weaknesses in the rock have been exploited, so large chunks can be removed. These are the granite quarries, incidentally, at Aswan. This is the quarry where famously we find the unfinished obelisk, an obelisk which fractured at a certain point. This is fantastic because it gives us a sense of how the areas around the shape of the obelisk were being worked away, so that this huge chunk of stone could be freed up. So the marks that are left behind in the little trenches around the quarry give us clues as to how they were working the stone. And we think that at least in the initial phases they were using very hard stone, dolerite pounders, and lots of these survive in the quarry at Aswan in this case. And you can see some of them here, and of course we have other tools as well. So there's a nice stone axe here in the Egyptian Museum. We also have scenes showing the Egyptians moving very large pieces of stone as well. This scene unfortunately hasn't survived now, but it was copied a number of times in the 19th century. It's a famous scene of the movement of a colossal statue from the tomb of a man called Jehuti Hotep at the site of Al Bersha, a little ways to the south of Tel El Amarna. This is a 12th dynasty tomb, and you can see a colossal statue here being dragged along on a sled using ropes with some guys down at the bottom pouring water onto the surface of the ground in front of the sled and the statue. For a while it was thought that this was most likely a kind of ritual thing, but actually it's been demonstrated in recent years that if you pour water onto a sand or mud surface, then it reduces the friction and allows the stones to be moved along more easily. So this would seem to be a very useful capture of exactly how they moved very large pieces of stone like this. We have a similar relief from the causeway of Unas of the 5th dynasty here at Saqqara. So the image above here is a relief from that causeway, lined with reliefs right the way along it, and you can see boats here with on its side a palm capital column. And you can see exactly that kind of column in place in the Valley Temple of Unas at the site here. So clearly they're being moved this way along the river, perhaps from somewhere like Aswan. The granite quarries are clustered around that sort of area to the south of Egypt. And we have the evidence of the trackways in some cases as well. This is a fantastic photograph from, again, Frank Monnier and David Lightbody's book of a hauling trackway in the Fayum. Petrie recovered another one in the area of the pyramid of Senusret II at Lahoun. These are his photographs of that. And we know again from tomb scenes of the existence of ramps, which allowed the ancients not only to drag stones across the ground, but to lift them up into position as well. So this is a very famous scene from the tomb of Rekhmirah, TT 100 in Thebes. Again, it's an 18th dynasty tomb, so later. But it shows a ramp being constructed around some temple columns. And ramps like that do survive in places. So this is probably the most famous example. This is the remains of a ramp which would have been used for the construction of the first pylon at Karnak. It's on the inside. You can just about see the remains of that mud brick there. But there are ramps elsewhere too. I think there's one more I'm going to show you. This is a modern ramp, but again, a nice little bit of sort of unintended experimental archaeology. At the beginning of the 20th century, when Georges Legrand was in charge of excavating and restoring the temples of Karnak, he constructed ramps so that fallen masonry could be lifted back up into position. And his team demonstrated that this was a perfectly viable method of lifting stones into position. So here we go, not just tomb scenes, not just the remains of ancient ramps, but the proof that it works too. When it comes to the Giza pyramids, of course, the ramps themselves don't survive, and because of the nature of the pyramid and the size, in particular of the two larger ones, Khufu and Khafra, we have to envision an absolutely colossal ramp. And because, as I say, of the sort of nature of the lie of the land, it's sometimes thought that rather complicated arrangement of spiral or right-angled turning ramps would be required. And there's a number of theories, as you can see on the left-hand side of the slide here, that have been put forward as to how this was done. The fact is, at the moment, that beyond saying that most probably they were using lots of people, lots of rope and ramps, we can't say exactly what that arrangement was. But again, the important point here is that no unknown or alien or whatever technology is required. We know the Egyptians were able to do this. We just can't know exactly how they did do it. By the way, this is another pyramid, much smaller, the pyramid of Sinki at Abydos, where the ramp is still present. If only we had a little bit of that from Giza, that would be useful. And again, when it comes to what we might want to look for if we were looking for the evidence for how they built these things, Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass state very clearly in their book, pyramids as large as Khufu's and Khafra's left human disturbances on a geological scale. The landscape, not only the archaeological material itself, but the landscape tells a story of the builders and the way they organized themselves. We should look for 5 major features: large quarried areas, remains of transport and supply ramps, access routes for non-local materials, a harbour. We've already seen from the Unas causeway that stone was being manoeuvred into position by boat from the river, and a settlement to accompany the workforce. So over the years, between Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass and other excavators, they have identified what would seem to be two key areas around the Khufu pyramid. An area to the south and to the east of the Khafra pyramid, south of the Khufu pyramids, east of the Khafra pyramid, which seems to be sort of empty of mastabas or pyramid complex buildings, which appears to have been the main quarry area. And there's another kind of empty area immediately to the west face of the Giza pyramid, which Lehner suggests is perhaps a construction area. The map on the left here shows the various places, the various sites across Egypt from which the various stones came, and various geologist archaeologists, foremost among them Rosemary and Dietrich Klemm, also James Harrell is another one, have analysed the stone used in buildings around the country, recovered it from archaeological sites, and analysed that stone, and they are able to say exactly where it came from. On that basis, we can see that yes, at Giza, stone was being retrieved from all over the country, and we know that from various for various different reasons. But the majority of the stone came locally, and a lot of it actually came from Giza itself. So we can see a number of places around the Giza plateau where the bedrock has been extensively manipulated. You just need to have a wander across, for example, the central mastaba field here, where what we're looking at are mastaba shapes cut from the natural rock. But the material that had to be removed in order to create these mastaba tombs was quite possibly used then for the construction of buildings around the site. So there was a sort of dual purpose going on here. You're freeing up stone to build buildings elsewhere, while at the same time creating these rock-cut mastaba tombs. It's an amazing place to walk around. If you ever get a chance to go around the central mastaba field, I highly recommend it. And a lot of these buildings that Lehner and Hawass suggest must have been there actually now are either attested archaeologically or mentioned in texts, and we'll come to the famous Red Sea Scrolls in just a little bit. This is an image from the recent publication, the Red Sea Scrolls of the Wadi Jaf papyri, and what they mean. All of this evidence together allows us to identify places at the Giza plateau which would have existed in the 4th dynasty at the time of the pyramid's construction, which essentially don't really exist to any great extent now, or at least they're not really visible. And these include the Akhet Khufu, which we've already come across in inscriptions in the tomb of Ka. This is essentially the pyramid town or the pyramid complex. There's also an Anku Khufu area, the area of the kind of living king, which probably comprised things like the royal palace, the granaries, the archives, which are mentioned in texts in various places. We then have various waterways and harbours which would have allowed access to the base of the plateau, probably for boats carrying things like the column we saw in the Unas Causeway inscriptions to arrive at the site, and they could then be brought up onto the plateau, probably via ramps in the area in between the areas that are now occupied by the Khafra and the Khufu causeways. And the papyri, these so-called Red Sea Scrolls, were discovered at the Red Sea site of Wadi El Jaf a few years ago, just about 10 years ago. They are the oldest surviving papyri from Egypt, oldest surviving papyri from anywhere in the world. They are administrative documents, essentially, including logbooks, kind of diaries relating to a man called Merer, who was responsible for some aspects of the administration of the pyramid's construction. And these are some of those fragments. These are fragments that comprise Papyrus B among the group. As you can see, they're fragmentary, but there's enough of them left, and they're written in quite clear, legible, inked hieroglyphs for us to be able to get a sense of what they tell us. And they say things like this: Day 21, Merer spends the day with his file. A file is a group of workmen, a kind of a team of workmen, loading a transport ship at Tura North. Tura is a quarry we know that fine white limestone comes from the outer casing of pyramids. Set sail from Tura in the afternoon. Day 22, spends the night at Ro She Khufu. Ro, or it's just the hieroglyphic letter R, means something like mouth. She means lake, mouth of the lake, the harbour of Khufu. In the morning, sets sail from the harbour of Khufu, sails towards Akhet Khufu, which we know is the pyramid complex, spends the night at the granaries of the harbour of Khufu. The director of 10, Hezi, spends the day with his naval section in the harbour of Khufu, spends the night at the harbour of Khufu. Day 24, Inspector Mera spends the day with his file hauling crafts, it's unclear this word, with those who are on the register of the elite. The ARPA teams, ARPA is that same word that's used in the Khufu work gang inscription inside the relieving chambers. The ARPA teams and the noble Ankaf, director of Rocher Khufu, the harbour of Khufu. We'll meet Ankaf again in just a little while. Inspector Mera spends the day with his team hauling stones in Tura, spends the night at Tura North, and so it goes on. So in some ways kind of mundane, but also, oh my goodness, he's mentioning an awful lot of different aspects of the site of Giza at the time of the pyramid's construction, and making reference to various, not only places, but people, including Ankaf, who, as I say, we'll come to in a second. He is somebody we already know quite a bit about from other sources. And altogether, this allows Pierre Tallet, the discoverer of the Wadi el-Jarf papyri, working very closely with Mark Lehner, along with Zahi Hawass, probably the preeminent Giza archaeologist of the last half century, to reconstruct the landscape of the harbour of Khufu as follows. So you've got the pyramid itself, labelled the Akhet Khufu. We think the Anku Khufu is slightly further down beneath the plateau itself in the Nile Valley. There is a Shey Akhet Khufu, the lake of the pyramid complex of Khufu, which allows access directly to the base of the pyramid complex, where the Valley Temple is. That Valley Temple was discovered during those excavations of waterways in the 1980s, I think it was, 1990s. And then you've got the Rocher Khufu, the Air Shey Khufu, the mouth of the harbour. That is essentially the port, the kind of gateway into the harbour. Which appears to be in the area of the modern villages of Nazlet el Betran and Nazlet el Sisi, which themselves lie on higher ground. Most probably those villages were built on the areas of higher ground either side of the entranceway to this harbour. And we're able to reconstruct things like the journeys made by Mera and his teams in between Tura, Giza, and various other places. And the papyri themselves are found on the Red Sea, which is another place that's relevant for the supply of various different materials being used in this great construction project at Giza. It's also, of course, important to remember that the Nile floods annually, which has a dramatic impact on the level of the water, which in times of high Nile would make the base of the plateau in some of these places much more easily accessible. Actually, suddenly lots more water around, so much more places accessible by boat. So the two images here represent the areas around the base of the plateau, the harbour area being administered by the director of the Rocher Khufu Ankaf at the time of high Nile and low Nile. Lehner and Hawass, of course, also state that what we would really want to find would be a kind of settlement for the workmen who did all this work. Where were those people? Who were they? Well, from the 1980s and 1990s onwards, precisely that settlement was identified in the southern part of Giza, a little way to the south of what's known as the Wall of the Crow, a monumental wall. The settlement is in the vicinity of the village of Hayt el Ghurab, which gives its name to this settlement. Most of the remains that they have recovered date to the times of Khafra and Menkaura, but there's evidence of an earlier occupation as well, which most probably relates to the time of the construction of the Pyramid of Khufu. Ankaf is best known, you may well know this statue, from this bust, which was discovered in his tomb, his mastaba tomb G7510, is a part of the Eastern Cemetery at Giza. It's an absolutely enormous tomb, and this was recovered by the Harvard-Boston expedition directed by George Reisner for a very long time at the beginning of the 20th century. It is one of the masterpieces of Egyptian sculpture, and extremely fine and lifelike. Well, we can't know if he really looked like this, but it's a compellingly realistic portrait of Ankaf, who we know from his tomb was a vizier and possibly half brother of Khufu himself, and for a long time he was thought to be very heavily involved in the construction of the Great Pyramid on the basis of his seniority within the elite. The vizier is essentially the number 2 to the king, in charge of the judiciary. We know he's a part of the royal family, or we think he is, perhaps very closely related to the king himself. And then the Wadi al-Jarf papyri comes along, and Merah's logbook tells us that exactly this individual is the director of the port, essentially, of the pyramid complex of Khufu. So somebody who we had thought probably was heavily involved, we now know is the person who is in charge of the comings and goings at this massive construction site. And in fact, his tomb, which is highlighted in the pink here, G7510, is aligned with this area of higher ground around the modern village of Nazlet el-Sisi, or the hamlet of Nazlet el-Sisi, which, along with Nazlet el-Batran, these two higher lying ground, they wouldn't have been swallowed up by the seasonal flood. We think that probably they were either side of the entranceway to the innermost part of the harbour. And we think probably, therefore, that is the reason, or possibly that's the reason for the alignment of Ankhaf's tomb. It's directly above his office, as it were. So, as they say, we should look for these 5 features, and after many decades of research, essentially, they have got them all. So, you know, when it comes to whether or not we have the evidence for how the pyramids were built, we have the harbour, we have the evidence for the workmen, we have the ramps, we have the quarries, we have the stone cutting tools, we have everything we need, in other words, to take us almost all the way to understanding exactly how the pyramids were built as a result of this massive operation under Pharaoh Khufu. So myth number 2 is that the construction of the pyramids is so incredible that it can only have been achieved with technology now lost to us from a distant, now lost civilization, or, you know, perhaps even aliens. Well, no, actually, although it is kind of incredible what they achieved, we have all of this evidence. There are still gaps here and there, but not nearly enough, really, for us to have to fall back on sensationalist theories. Now, what was their function? Well, I'm saying it at the outset here, they were tombs. I often hear people saying, well, there's no evidence that they were tombs. And people often say, but no mummy was found in the pyramid. Well, how do we know it's a tomb if no mummy was found? Well, this next section might seem like overkill, but I've probably heard it said that they're not tombs and there's no evidence rather too many times. So please forgive me if it sounds like I'm going on too long here, but here we go. I got this message. It just happens to be a favorite example of a message like this that I got a little while ago. You speak about tombs on the Giza plateau, but no mummy was found. Interesting phenomenon. And my response was to make reference to a whole sequence of publications relating to human remains discovered in tombs at Giza. I come to think of this as being a bit well, like what I call here the ruined bank analogy. What I have in mind is that if you imagine that in the future, archaeologists uncover a long lost high street, they come across a series of buildings which appear to correspond to what they know of shops and restaurants and that sort of thing. And they come across a building which seems to have a counter in it and the ruins of what sometimes people say is an old-fashioned cash machine, and there are counters and there are old fragmentary checkbooks and there are badges saying things like chief cashier, relating to somebody who we know worked in a bank, and there's a bank vault and a safe and all these things, but there's no money. There's no money left. So the archaeologists deduced this is probably a bank because it seems to have all the features of a bank. All the inscriptions, all of the material, all of the paraphernalia that you would need to run a bank. The only thing that we don't have is the money itself. And this, to me, is like the argument that the pyramids are not tombs. There's no mummy, therefore they can't be tombs. But you've got just about everything else you could possibly want to identify them as tombs. So when people say there's no evidence, well, actually, that's not quite right. There's rather a lot of evidence for it. So here goes. They're in the West. The pyramids are in the West. And for the Egyptians, of course, sunset, they observe the sun setting in the West, is symbolic of the end of life, so associated with death. Tombs were oriented this way as well because the Egyptians conceived of the passing from life to death as a journey towards the west, towards the place where the sun sets. The west is the place where the Egyptians' preeminent funerary deity, Osiris, was thought to dwell. And one of the epithets of Osiris, actually it's the name of a god that came to be fused with Osiris, is Khentiamentiu, the foremost one of the Westerners, reflecting this idea of dwelling in the west. And it's for this reason that most, not all, but most Egyptian cemeteries are sited on the west of the river, as indeed Giza and all the other pyramid sites are. The pyramids are at the center of what are obviously cemeteries among dozens of monuments conforming in terms of decoration, architecture, and contents. And even if mummies haven't been recovered from pyramids, they have certainly been recovered from other tombs. These all correspond to tombs. So we've already seen that not only at Giza do you have the pyramids, but of course they are surrounded by hundreds, if not thousands, of tombs containing decoration, architecture, grave goods, and human remains, indicating that they are tombs. There are, as I say, thousands of these, and each of these contains a rich sort of trove of information speaking to their use as tombs. Again, I'm falling back on my photographs of the central mastaba field here because it's such a fantastic place. This is one of these mastabas, in this case constructed of a mixture of the natural rock and stone blocks. You can just about see a false door, which is a very common architectural feature in tombs of this time. It's symbolically the point at which the spirit of the deceased can come and go from the tomb to the next life or to the earthly life, and these also functioned when they're on the outside of tombs like this one as a cult place where the memory of the individual could be remembered and venerated. Cult places like this associated with tombs inspire the much more elaborate provision that you have in pyramid complexes where you've got a fully fledged temple next to the pyramid and another one down in the valley temple. So you have false doors, and these tend to memorialize the individual. This is the name and titles of Niank Ra from the central mastaba field. This, of course, is very common. You also tend to have lengthier inscriptions naming not just the individual, their titles, often family members as well. You might even get an autobiographical inscription telling us what they did in life. These are clearly memorials, allowing the deceased to be remembered after their death. Tombs like this often feature scenes of mourning as well. We have two nice examples of that here. The one on the left is actually from a later tomb. It's from the 18th dynasty, tomb of Meri Nath at Saqqara. But the one on the right is from much closer to the era of the pyramids. This is the tomb of Ankh-Mahor, also at Saqqara. These are among the most human scenes that we have from anywhere in Egypt. I think scenes of people in mourning with their arms raised up to their heads in exactly the gesture that you or I would do now if we were upset or grieving. And it's an absolutely universal kind of human behavior. And although we don't see them in these two examples here, they are connected with other aspects of the story of the death and funeral of the deceased. We do see that in probably what's perhaps the most famous example of the depiction of mourners. These are the mourners from the tomb of Ramose, again an 18th dynasty tomb, this time in Luxor, Theban tomb number 55. And at the end of this scene, this connects with an image of, it's not terribly clear, but that yellow thing standing up in the bottom register here is the coffin of the deceased standing before, just to the right of it, which is behind it, and the entrance to the tomb. And this is an absolutely typical scene of the point at which the body of the deceased inside its coffin is introduced into the tomb. So in other words, the burial is made complete, funerary provisions made complete. So there is no question whatsoever that all of this is connected with the death and the funeral. Pyramids, as we've seen, are clearly an evolution from earlier tomb types, including the mastabas of the early dynastic elite. So we've seen how the step pyramid evolved out of mastabas. In fact, mastabas themselves evolve out of the very simplest, earliest, simple tumulus mound burials. And some mastabas incorporate monumentally tumuli into their structures. So you see one here in Mastaba 3507 from Saqqara, built over the burial chamber. So essentially what's happened is that, over time, if you could afford it, you have not just a mound over your burial, but a mound and then an elaborate, very regular-sided, straight-sided monument built over and around your burial. And this is how mastabas evolve. And there comes a point where the mound comes to be constructed as a kind of stepped monument, and we think that possibly this is what then inspires the step pyramid, which, as we've seen, was initially conceived of as a mastaba, one of these large rectangular mounds over the top of the burial, but was then subsequently enlarged into a pyramid. This then leads, of course, to the evolution of the design of pyramids. This is the Meidum pyramid, stepped, but with an attempt at straight sides. The bent pyramid exhibiting the sort of elaboration of the internal compartments, and that eventually leads us to what we get at Giza with the Great Pyramid. So it's clear that the Great Pyramid is an evolution from these earlier monumental and earlier non-monumental tomb types. Pyramids are also, more or less throughout ancient history in Egypt, a marker of tombs of various kinds. So this is a reconstruction of a much smaller kind of pyramid that marked the tombs on the hillside at Dar el-Medina in the 18th to 20th dynasties in Thebes. We also see these in tomb scenes. So this is another of these very typical scenes where we've got sort of the full set here, in that we've got two coffins relating to family members, deceased individuals who are about to be introduced into their tomb, which is shown as a kind of monumental doorway built into the natural rock, which is shown as this sort of pinkish colouring at the right hand side, and that door is topped off with a pyramid shape. So pyramid, clearly a marker here, and there's absolutely no doubt again what's going on here. You've got two coffins being mourned by family members. You can see a young lady at the sort of foot of the coffin to the left there, again with arm raised to her head in this mourning gesture. And that motif, the pyramid motif, of course, not only survives for so much of Egyptian history, but it's exported as well to the next door kingdom of Kush, and it becomes the default architectural form for the royal tombs of the kings of Kush and of the successor state, the kingdom of Meroe, down into the 3rd or 4th century of the current era. This is the group at Meroe itself. And although the pyramids of the 4th dynasty are not decorated, as we've seen, it's not just the pyramid of Khufu or the other Giza pyramids, but it's all the pyramids in the sequence from the time of Joseph's successors down to the last reign of the 5th dynasty, time of Unas. They're not decorated, but at the point of the construction of the pyramid of Unas, who we know from the king list and from the ceramics and all these other types of evidence we've talked about, is the last king of the 5th dynasty era. For some reason, the decision is taken that the funerary text, which must have existed prior to this point, should be cut into the walls. So you go from absolutely nothing at all to the walls being completely covered in text. And these texts are absolutely funerary in character. We call them pyramid texts. They include things like this. This Unas comes to you, O Nut. Nut is the goddess of the sky, of course. This Unas comes to you, O Nut. He has left a Horus behind him. That's his successor, the next king. May you open your place in heaven among the stars of heaven. The pyramid texts are largely to do with the passage of the king from the earthly life to the next life. That's conceived of as a journey kind of to the sky, to the heavens, to the stars. And the texts are all about that. So in terms of the decoration, very much funerary in character. Even if the pyramids don't contain mummies, they certainly contain other items of funerary equipment, such as somewhere to bury the body of a very elaborate and very large sort of burial chamber sarcophagus at the base of the enormous shaft underneath the first pyramid, the step pyramid, which in places is decorated incidentally with these stars, which crop up in tombs at all periods in Egyptian history. The pyramid of Sneferu at Meidum was found to contain, if not mummified remains, then coffin fragments of this early kind of undecorated coffin type found by Petrie. They're now in the Petrie Museum in London. The burial chamber in the Pyramid of Khufu has one of these funny rectangular shaped stone boxes that we call sarcophagi, and which elsewhere all over the country at all different periods are found to contain human remains because they are sarcophagi in tombs. The Pyramid of Khafra also contains a sarcophagus. Here, apologies to another of my groups here for not asking permission for this, but tremendous that Kathy provided scale so brilliantly here. No sarcophagus in the burial chamber of Menkaura anymore. That's because it was removed by Vyse and Perring, I think, Colonel Vyse. In the first half of the 19th century, the drawing on the left-hand side here shows that sarcophagus in place. So the burial chamber is empty now, but it wasn't up until a certain point in the first half of the 19th century. The same team, incidentally, found more coffin fragments. Actually, we think that this coffin is perhaps from a later period, probably to do with the burial having been remade, possibly after a robbery. We know that kind of thing was happening elsewhere during the New Kingdom, for example, end of the New Kingdom. The sarcophagus, unfortunately, is now lost. The ship that it was being transported to London on sank in 1838, but not before this drawing was made. So we have a good idea of what it would have looked like, and certainly, again, it corresponds to what we would expect from the receptacle for human remains. There is another such sarcophagus in the Pyramid of Teti of the 6th dynasty. A few fragments of the mummy did survive here. In the Pyramid of Pepi I, you have a sarcophagus and a canopic chest with its lid, both found to be empty, but near to the canopic chest, a tightly wrapped package, which appeared to be the mummified internal organs, and did survive, still in exactly the shape of a canopic jar here. Of course, it's well known that mummification involved the removal of the internal organs and their separate mummification in canopic jars or a canopic chest. And so the survival of something like that in the burial chamber, again, very much speaks to its function as a burial chamber within a tomb. Again, in Merin Ra, also at Saqqara, you've got a sarcophagus and a canopic chest. Within the later 12th dynasty pyramid at Lahoun, we get the remains of a uraeus here, an offering table, some leg bones, presumed to be those of Senusret II, to whom this pyramid belonged. Similar situation in the pyramid of Amenemhat III at Hawara. The burial chamber was waterlogged here. Petrie had, as he says here, to grope around underneath the water. He found some bits of bones, much charcoal, showing the coffins had been burnt inside. All of this really is telling us that it's absolutely common for burial chambers within tombs generally, but I suppose especially tombs of the elite, the most important individuals in society, the elitist of the elite, the pharaohs, to have been robbed. But where the fragments survive, they speak to them having been tombs. Sarcophagi, canopic chests, coffins, and human remains, albeit fragmentary. Something similar in the pyramid of Amenemhat III at Dashur, sarcophagus, canopic chest. In this case, we have a pyramidion as well, which rather neatly, again, speaks to the funerary character of the monument. It's inscribed with this interesting arrangement of hieroglyphic signs, which read, the eyes of the king, that is, behold the perfection of the sun god Ra. And the idea is that the sun god Ra, with the wings here, is sort of rising up to the top of the pyramid, as if the king and the sun god as one are sort of ascending to the heavens atop the pyramid. Again, very much part of this Egyptian belief in that being what happens to you in the afterlife. And the inscription around the bottom, again, it sort of echoes this. Words spoken, may the sight be open to the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, the lord of the two lands, Nemat Ra, Amenhotep III, so he may see the Lord of Horizon and his crossing of the upper sky. Words spoken by the horizon, may you rest upon it, which please the sky. That same pyramid also contained the burials of two royal women, one of them Queen Art, the other one an anonymous royal woman, both found to contain human remains which were sufficient for them to be identified as females of ages 35 in the case of Art and 25 in the other. So again, fragmentary, but significant nonetheless. And just a few years ago, this pyramid was discovered at Dahshur. It was initially thought the burial chamber was intact. It turned out not to be. Many of you will probably know the story here. It turned out to be the pyramid of a princess of Pharaoh Amenemhotep. This was the situation inside the burial chamber as it was found. So I mentioned it was thought or hoped that it was intact. It wasn't. That box, that wooden box, is a canopic chest which was inscribed with at least a part of the name of the Queen. And although you can't see it here, directly in front of where the camera is and sort of down on the floor is a very distinctive Middle Kingdom wooden coffin lid of a woman with a very distinctive Hathor wig. So again, and some human remains as well. As was reported in the Ministry of Antiquities reports, which appeared around this time, May 2017, remains of human bones, fragmentary, but human remains nonetheless. So, despite the common misconception, pyramids have been found with human remains in them, even if they are usually disturbed. We have to remember, however, that we must not expect undisturbed burials. It is vanishingly rare to find intact tombs. There are, I shudder to think, tens of thousands of monumental tombs that have survived from ancient Egypt, and of those, a handful have been found intact to any extent. The vast majority have been comprehensively robbed, most probably from a very short time after the burials were made. We can see clearly that that's what happened in some cases. But of course, we've had centuries and centuries ever since for nefarious types to get in there and rob whatever might be remaining. And to just by way of comparison, for anybody who's sort of wondering why we haven't got intact mummies inside the pyramids at Giza, of the 64 known tombs, in inverted commas, in the Valley of the Kings, almost none of them contained intact mummies. And as far as I'm aware, nobody is arguing that those are not tombs. One of them that did is KV35, which in fact contained a cache, which we know was a reaction in part against tomb robbery, and we have abundant evidence that tomb robbery was taking place in the Valley of the Kings in the later New Kingdom, not that long after those kings had been buried. And even the tomb of Tutankhamun, I told you it'd get mentioned, which is the best example we have of what an intact tomb should look like, was robbed. Even we know from the blockings at various points in the tomb of King Tut that it was violated and then resealed. Howard Carter thought that he could see robbers' footprints on the white lid of the box at the top right here. He also found a bundle of linen with inside it some gold jewelry, which it seems had been all wrapped up so that a robber could make off with it, but then discarded, presumably when the robbers were rumbled. And there are a number of things missing from the assemblage in the tomb of Tutankhamun, including things like oils and unguents, which would have been exactly the kind of valuable, recyclable, resaleable, and portable things that robbers would have wanted to get away with. So even that tomb, which gives us so much of our information about what we should expect from an Egyptian burial, even that one was robbed. But where we do get to some extent intact burials, those sarcophagi, just like the ones that we see in the pyramids, are found to contain coffins, and inside those human remains. So this is a very famous image of the sarcophagus in the tomb of Tutankhamun, a large rectangular stone box with a nest of coffins inside it, inside which of course was the mummy of the king. There's something similar was discovered inside the tomb of Amenhotep II, KV35. This is the cache tomb, but actually the mummy of Amenhotep II, the king whose tomb this was originally, was found in position, albeit rewrapped and recoffined inside the sarcophagus. This is the same situation inside the sarcophagus of Susenes I at Tanis. Again, stone box, actually recycled from the 19th dynasty king Meremptar, but found with stone anthropoid sarcophagus inside it, silver sarcophagus, and inside that the human remains of the king, which you can just about see there on the right-hand image. So myth 3 is that pyramids were not tombs. Well, I'm afraid they really were. In their design, location, buildings associated with them, contents, decoration, they conform absolutely to Egyptian tombs. They have been found to contain human remains, not intact mummies, but the proportion of tombs that has survived intact is vanishingly small. Phew. I'm glad we've done that one. We're getting there, folks. We're getting there. Thanks for hanging on. I'm sorry I've gone over so badly today. I did say at the start I've got way too much stuff. Last thing here is alternative ideas, and here I'm not so much looking at ancient Egypt and the evidence for ancient Egypt as the sort of phenomenon of a different or kind of desire to look at things in different ways. This is a little quote and a response from a passage in Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawas's book, which deals with this exact issue. They say they received a message at a certain point saying, "Why are you afraid to even consider the idea that the culture that built the pyramids was an advanced one and then disintegrated?" And we wrote back, they say, "In fact, right now, we are excavating the disintegrated remains of an advanced culture, the culture of Old Kingdom Egypt, dating to around 2500 BC, which is an excellent answer, I think. But this phenomenon that people seem to think that, you know, we must look for a different culture for which there's no evidence. To explain the wonderful buildings at Giza, rather than just accepting that indeed the ancient Egyptians were themselves incredible, is one that doesn't seem to want to go away. They go on to say the Egyptians of the Old Kingdom left behind their own royal statues, boats, tombs, coffins, bodies, texts, massive building dumps, potsherds embedded in every nook and cranny of the pyramids and temples, and the bedrock floor around the Sphinx. We have excavated to arm's length natural fissures and cavities in that floor, literally in the shadow of the giant lion body. Up from the clay fill, we have pulled Sphinx builders' debris, flint flakes from tool sharpening, small sherds of pottery, typical of the Old Kingdom Egyptians. We have extracted 7 tons of similar pottery from our excavations of the cemeteries and settlements. That is a huge amount of evidence for the consensus view. I got this earlier this year in as part of the reaction to the Mysteries of the Pyramids TV series that went out. A friendly message, I think, but somebody saying, "Nobody knows if they were tombs, though. I believe that is just guesswork, just like how they were constructed. Egyptologists are pretty mainstream. Finding any evidence that goes against their history books could destroy someone's life's work." And I responded to try and put them right. If I can just elaborate on my reply a little bit here. It's not as though, there's a consensus view and we just don't want to change anything ever. There are plenty of disagreements within Egyptology, and just off the top of my head, you might know some of these things. It's been claimed recently that the famous MYTHBUSTIng Giza are actually not Old Kingdom paintings, but they're fake. They were made in the 19th century. The supposed Minoan wall paintings at Tel Adab are actually no such thing. They're Egyptian. Peru Nefer was either located in Memphis or it was located at Tel Adab, and there are two very distinguished colleagues of mine who absolutely will not budge on their respective positions on this. The identity of the KV-55 mummy, many of you will know, it's definitely Akhenaten. Well, it's definitely not Akhenaten. It's definitely Smenkhare. A colleague of mine was arguing that Susenes II didn't exist a few years ago because there's no evidence, only for somebody in the audience at the conference he was giving a paper on this stick their hand up in the air and say, "Well, I was just in a storage magazine at Karnak the other day, and actually I did find the evidence." And all this played out very cordially. It meant that that particular paper more or less had to be torn up, but it, I just mentioned that to sort of suggest, this is a dynamic field. Things are changing all the time. Reconstruction of the Third Intermediate Period is becoming completely taken apart and redone in the last few decades. And as for this idea that somebody's life's work stands to sort of be completely destroyed, it's just simply not true. If the pyramids turned out to be 100,000 years old and built by aliens, I would carry on, just make a cup of coffee and my sandwiches for lunch, just exactly as always. It wouldn't change the chronology of the 25th dynasty, which is actually what I spent most of my life working on. And most of us Egyptologists, far from our life's work hinging on something like this, actually are doing lots of different things, and lots of us are doing things which are controversial, as well as things that are much less controversial. I just mentioned here colleagues of mine who are doing things like pyramid alignments, but also something much more mundane, like domestic architecture in the 18th dynasty, or the search for Heri Hor, the controversial search for the tomb of Heri Hor, the tomb of Amenhotep the first, but also 21st dynasty coffin types. That's the specialism of Professor Andres Nowinski. Both Dr. Spence and Professor Nowinski getting involved in these sort of more contentious subject areas, but if they were shown not to be right in their respective views on things, they'd simply go back to their other things. They wouldn't have their life's work ruined. And indeed, the conventional wisdom, as I say, does change. I've already mentioned that the Third Intermediate Period chronology was completely turned on its head in the 1980s. And indeed, in the last few years, the sequence of kings in the 25th dynasty has had to be revised. We've had to swap places around. There's plenty of room for this kind of revision within our subject. The important thing here, when it comes to the consensus view versus the revisionist view, is that the consensus view is based on literally millions of pieces of evidence. I'm not exaggerating. Primary archaeological and textual evidence collected over the last 2 centuries and more by thousands of archaeologists and others. It doesn't come down to the life's work of one person. The consensus view is sort of built on the shoulders of generations of scholars who have familiarized themselves with all of this material, all of which has been documented, described, drawn, photographed, interpreted, published in the form of thousands of books and articles. And in some ways, the job of being an Egyptologist is not sort of having ideas or digging things up. It's getting to grips with the published literature and the data, or at least knowing where it is. So for me to put together a talk like this, I partly have to know stuff about Giza. I also have to know where to look for it. And collectively, all of that literature is what the consensus view is built on. It's not stuff that's in my head or anybody else's head. It's all in the literature, and all that literature is very much available, particularly online these days. And I just wanted to draw your attention to a couple of sites that I think are particularly important. The sensationally useful MFA Boston Giza Archives website is an absolute treasure trove of original documentation, photographs, and archival material of all kinds, and a huge digitized library of Giza-related publications. So on the left-hand side here, this is the Reisner volume on the Menkaure pyramid, which is where I got all the stuff on the Khufu graffiti from. All of this stuff is freely accessible online. You don't need to be an Egyptologist. You don't need to be a sort of a member of the club or anything. It's all out there. There is a mass of this stuff. And I would always say, for anybody looking to challenge the consensus view, please, make sure that you are absolutely sure of all the evidence that's out there in these publications before you attach yourselves to any other kind of theory. It's a little bit out of date now, but Porter and Moss, Topographical Bibliography of Ancient Egyptian Hieroglyphic Text Reliefs and Paintings, is still invaluable as a basic kind of reference tool for archaeological sites. So for Giza, you want volume 3, part 1, Abu Rawash to Abu Sir, and as you can see from this part of the contents, this gives you a rundown of all of the various different cemeteries, tomb by tomb, name of the tomb owner, brief descriptions, references to further reading. As I say, it's a little bit out of date, but it's still by far and away the best we have. And wonderfully, as of the last few years, maps and plans, of course, as well, it is now available freely via the Oxford University Griffith Institute website. So you can download the published volumes. And I get so many of my maps and plans that I use for talks like these from Porter and Moss, because they're still kind of ground zero. It's like the Bible for Egyptian archaeology. So again, no excuse for not getting to grips with the material when you've got a fantastic resource like this. So those people out there who think that there's a kind of alternative truth might think that Egyptologists like me are, I don't know, not so clever, too stuck in the mud and conventional and not prepared to listen to new ideas, closed-minded, maybe we're even hiding something. None of this is true. At the very least, these people would have conceded that people like me are spending all of our time. And, you know, Mark Lehner, I think it's true, in fact, originally went to Giza as somebody looking for an alternative truth, found himself working on the material, made himself into the preeminent archaeologist working at the coalface, at the site, on the primary material, and absolutely changed his position from, you know, the Egyptologists are wrong, they're hiding something, to, oh no, they're not. There's a huge amount of evidence to show that the consensus view is right. And in fact, he spent the last 50 years strengthening that view by adding huge quantities of data to it. So, you know, we are people like me working at these places, working in storerooms, reading about the subject, giving lectures, you know, talking to colleagues. Expertise is hard earned. And I'm sorry, this is probably sounding like a rant at this point, but we spend a long time getting to grips with this stuff, and we are not hiding anything. The stuff is all there, but it does take a long time, I guess, to take it all on board. So if there's a myth for, it's that Egyptologists know some sort of truth, but don't want the real truth to get out because it will ruin their reputation or their life's work, or maybe there's some other reason why they're hiding something. And when I first was drafting this presentation, I was going to say something else, and I just put these crying with laughter emojis in. And by the time I was getting to the end of the presentation, I thought, oh, that'll do. That's pretty much my my reaction to all of this. So there we go. Blimey, I've overrun so badly. Hey, thank you so much for listening. If there's anybody still out there, thanks for staying with me. I really appreciate it. The recording of this talk should be available the moment I come offline. So if you found yourself losing the will to live, or falling asleep, or needing to get up and stretch your legs or whatever, the recording is there. And for anybody who's managed to sit through the whole thing, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being out there. I wouldn't be doing this if it weren't for people out there listening. So thank you very much. And I hope this was, God, I worry about the things I missed out, but I hope there was a good amount of good stuff in there. So I'm going to have a look at the chat, and which I said I wasn't going to do during the talk, although I did notice that there was a bit in there. I see a few people making contributions. I should say that this is the last talk I'm going to be doing for a while that is completely freely accessible. From next month onwards, my talks are going to be for channel members only. There's going to be a new category of channel membership, Lapis membership, which will allow subscribers in that category to get access to the new talks. There's going to be one a month, as there has been recently. The next one is going to be how to read hieroglyphs. We're going to be looking at those Abydos king lists. I haven't announced any more yet, but coming up are the Middle Kingdom and the Fayum, the Orion at Abydos. I was actually thinking about doing a part 2 Giza talk as well, but you can let me know, and I always appreciate your suggestions as well. So that should take me up to Christmas, and we'll see where we go after that. But so while this talk is free, I do put a lot of time and effort into these things, and if you'd like to say thanks, there is a thank you button somewhere around the stream that allows you to buy me a coffee. If you'd like to do that, I'd really appreciate it. And to those of you who I can see have already done that, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. So, oh blimey, there is a lot for me to get through here. Maybe I should. No, I'm not going to work backwards. I'm going to try and go to where I left you last time. Oh crikey. Oh, somebody says, Chris, will you give an update on the rollout of other subscription levels after this? So very, very quickly on this other subscription levels, the next talk is on something like the 7th of September. And I think to keep things simple, I will set the the next subscription category going towards the end of this month, so that everybody's got a few days before the 7th to sign up to the Lapis category, which will allow you to get access to that next lecture. And then obviously it'll renew monthly after that. So Lapis membership definitely going online end of this month in prep for the next talk. I am not absolutely sure if Gold membership is going to launch straight away. Maybe let me know on your thoughts about that. I just need to do, it's a bit of work to set the categories up. I just need to see, yeah, if I can do that. But the really important next step is to set the Lapis category up so that the next lecture is available to subscribers. So thank you for asking. I hope to see some of you upgrade to that level, because frankly, if no one does, then I'll just be me on my own talking into the ether. Noha says, what's the funniest conspiracy theory about the pyramids you've heard of? Oh, crikey, there's so many kind of silly ones. I mean, Dara actually said, Dara O'Brien, the stand-up comedian I did the TV series with, said on camera at one point to me while we were doing a piece about these silly theories that we were talking about a power station, which I was prepared for, the idea that pyramids are power stations. He said that he mentioned the one about how actually there's a giant statue of the cat goddess Bastet underneath the ground, and the pyramids are just her ears sticking up. I don't know, that we couldn't use the take after that because it got too silly. So I don't know, maybe that's a good answer. I mean, I do the thing when I was putting this presentation together, the thing clearly that gets me more than anything else is the idea that because there's no sort of intact mummy in the burial chamber of Khufu, then we can't say that the pyramids are tombs. You probably got the sense that God got no time for that. Chakalakak, forgive me for pronouncing that in such a terrible way, says, I'm thinking of starting a rumor that the Hawaiian Menehunes built them, since they like to move rocks around. Sure. Why not? Open season. Fun fact: the only surviving Khufu statue is ironically the smallest piece of sculpture ever discovered. Yes, I thought about including the statue from Abydos, Noha. I just partly ran out of time, and also I just thought, oh God, I don't want to. Somehow I felt like that might be an invitation to people to, because it's a 26th dynasty statue, isn't it? It's not contemporary with Khufu. I thought that might be a opportunity for people to say, oh well, yes. The pyramids are a different date or something. Anne says, great overview of current state of pyramid site. Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Anne. Oh, please. Yeah, Amy says, please remember to like the live stream. Oh, yes. That's a good point. Thanks, Amy. Yes. I suppose if you're here, you've probably liked and subscribed to the video and subscribed to the channel. I think people I know who are more professional at these things, including probably Amy, know to say those things, and I didn't say that today. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do it. That'd be great. Steve says, regarding Khufu and his statue, there might be more to find in areas close to the suburbs. Yeah, good shout, Stephen. Something I would have liked to have gone into more detail about is everything that was discovered around the causeway of Khufu and around the end of the causeway where we've got the Valley Temple and the possible remains of a palace. It's all underneath modern buildings now, but you could tell from the slides I did show about the Ankou Khufu area where we know from the text that there was a palace, there were granaries, there was an archive. We shouldn't necessarily expect a huge amount to have survived underneath the modern settlement, but you never know. And the fact that we don't have more images of Khufu, Noha mentioned that we just have that one statue from which was found at Abydos and is of a much later date, but inscribed with Khufu's name. The fact that we don't have more is probably down to chance survival. And of course, the Valley temples, both of Menkaure in particular, but also Khafra, were found to contain some fantastic sculptures. So who knows what might have been in the Valley Temple of Khufu at one point. It is a bit of an odd sort of gap in the records. Glenn says you're far more polite in describing these alternative ideas than I would be. Maybe it's just that I'm currently calm about it, but yeah, I have to say, when I've received one or two messages, I don't know, about alternative ideas, yeah, sometimes the temptation is to go a bit overboard and cite lots of, I don't know, academic literature. Anyway, I'm calm about it at the moment. Marcus says, big fan here from Brazil. Thank you so much for joining all the way from Brazil, Marcus. Can you tell me the difference between, or relation between, Ra and Aten? That almost sounds like an advertisement for my last talk, Marcus, on Amenhotep and Akhenaten. Although I'm not sure I dealt with explicitly that question. Essentially, the Aten was an aspect of the sun god Ra, which came to be, particularly in the reign of Akhenaten, a god in its own right, his own right. But the Aten is specifically the sun disk form of the sun god Ra, so they're sort of one and the same. If you'll excuse the shameless self-promotion, do have a watch of my Amenhotep and Akhenaten talk. There's quite a lot about the sun god in there. Deviant Outcast, great name, says, question, read an article recently about a French team of architects claim that hydrologic we used building the stepped pyramid. Are you familiar with this, and what's your thoughts? I'm really sorry, I'm not familiar with it. Maybe you could drop me a line with that, and I'll let you know. At least I don't recognize it from your description, but it may be just that I don't know the technical stuff. Presumably, Lars of Mars says, presumably royal tombs were initially uninscribed because the associated mortuary temples would have contained them. Yes, exactly. Or rather, at least as likely, I think, the texts and whatever existed, they were probably written somewhere else. So, you know, the Valley Temple of Khafra appears to be completely free of inscriptions. But the likelihood, I think, is that the necessary texts were written on papyrus, which just doesn't survive. Which is partly why the Merah Wadi al Jarf papyri are such a sensational find, the oldest in the world. It shows that, you know, papyri were being used, and it's, you know, just that we've hardly got anything at all. My guess would be that the texts probably were on papyri. There's just this moment, for some reason, at the time of Unas, where they say, why don't we write them on the walls? Why not? And that, you know, we've got no idea what the thinking process is behind that, but probably they were written on perishable materials, would be my guess. Although he says, Lars says, I imagine the early pharaohs seeing it as a somewhat gauche decorating the walls of their eternal palace. Yeah, maybe it was a thing of taste. Angel Great says, some Egyptologists think we should spell historical pharaohs' name to better reflect how they would have been spoken in ancient Egyptian. That's a really interesting thought, and thanks so much for your contribution, by the way. So on that, I think the problem is, while we accept that the conventional way that we pronounce the names of ancient Egyptians, including pharaohs, now is probably not right. I think firstly, I don't think we're ever going to get that close, or we certainly couldn't be sure that we were getting close to the way they were really pronounced. And if you start introducing non-conventional ways of saying these names, then there'd be chaos, I think. So I think we are stuck with the conventional forms. I mean, if you can imagine that every book that's written from now on uses a slightly different version of the name of Pharaoh Khufu or Ramesses or Akhenaten or whatever, it would be very difficult to keep track of all these things. So I think, you know, it's a kind of imperfect solution to use the conventions that we do, but it does work, I think. Thank you. Thanks so much, everybody. I'm not going to be able to get through all of these comments, but it's so great to see so many, and so great to see little conversations here going on between you all. I love the idea that we've got a nice little community here. Shaloma Ishtov says Orion's belt bends the other way. Yes, yes, that was the point I was trying to make. Maybe you put it more simply than I did. Maybe I should have handed over to you for that section. Lars also again says erosion theories never held water for me. Yeah, I wish I knew the geology of the erosion theory slightly better. My understanding really only extends as far as you know, a geologist in the 1990s, or some geologists in the 1990s, having said the only way the weathering pattern that we see on the Sphinx could have arisen is from the action of rain, and then lots of other geologists subsequently saying that's not right. It could have been much more occasional rain and runoff, and that is all the explanation we need. Yeah, so I mean, it was a sort of sensationally exciting announcement at the time, but subsequently debunked, as is so often the way with these things. Joe says Egyptology suggests Giza was an island up to 200 years ago. Yeah, I guess that's a reference to the in particular the slide I showed of the situation as would have been at Giza in the time of the flood and at the time of the low Nile, which clearly was a factor. We know that certain aspects of the construction process must have been seasonal for that reason, and in fact that's reflected in Merer's journal. There are things that he could do during times of high Nile, and other things that he was obliged to do during times of low Nile because the transport situation would have been so different. It's been one of the sort of great revelations, I think, of archaeology, the archaeology of Egypt in the time I've been studying, that when I was first studying, there was no real or very little attention paid to the kind of environment and landscape aspects of the way ancient Egypt worked and the way it developed, and we're much more aware of it now. Thanks to people like Mark Lehner, David Jeffries, Angus Graham, Stephen Zeidelmeyer. There are lots of people now. We're all so much more aware of it, and the Egyptians' capacity to work with it, which is another way in which they in many ways are much kind of more intelligent and skilled than we are. It's a great shame, actually. It reminds me, it's a great shame in that sense that there is no inundation anymore since the construction of the high dam at Aswan. I think we would all be much more in touch with that aspect of what life was like for the ancient Egyptians if there was still the flood. Of course, the high dam has been beneficial for Egypt in lots of ways, but it is a shame to have lost that connection with the way the world worked naturally, I think, in the past. Stephen says, I wonder if the lack of any inscription in the pyramids reflects Pharaoh's divine status as a god on earth. It's interesting to consider how that changes in the Middle Kingdom. Yeah, maybe. I mean, actually, there's very little decoration in the interior of royal tombs, in fact, until the 18th dynasty. So the 12th dynasty pyramids are very different in lots of ways from the 12th and 13th dynasty pyramids, very different from the Old Kingdom pyramids, but they're not lavishly decorated. The real difference comes when you get to the 18th dynasty, and in fact that's not even necessarily just a sort of geographical change. We know that the Middle Kingdom pyramids are essentially being built in the sort of southern Memphite and Fayum regions, whereas the Valley of the Kings, of course, are in Thebes. But the earlier Theban royal tombs of the 17th dynasty and quite possibly the earliest 18th dynasty royal tombs were not decorated either. The earliest is the tomb of Thutmose III, the earliest decorated. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. Which a little bit like the pyramid of Unas, suddenly, spontaneously, is completely and utterly covered. Not every, but so much of the available wall space decorated every inch of it, whereas up until that point, tombs are undecorated, it seems. Arthur says, hello Arthur, it's a tiny flaw in the alternative chronology theories. And I can't possibly repeat the last part of that, but I enjoyed reading it. I saw you in The Guardian the other day, Arthur. Good on you. Okay. So Anne says, is most of that ancient harbour area silted in now with the Nile riverbed shifted further to the east? Yes, and so I could have elaborated on this. So in fact, I think that the harbour, the Old Kingdom harbour, was fed from a now extinct channel of the Nile, perhaps not the main branch. The Nile has moved since the Old Kingdom. I'm not absolutely sure of all the details of that, but it has certainly moved. But in any case, it's a now extinct Nile channel, I think, that provided most of the water for the Old Kingdom construction harbour, the Rocher Khufu, etc. But the vast majority of that whole area is now underneath the modern settlement. So it's not just that it's silted up. It would have disappeared under fields. I mean, it's interesting to speculate, isn't it, that if we could have had access to the area at the base of the plateau at a point, say 100 years ago, 150 years ago, when it was still mostly agricultural land, what might have survived? Difficult to know, but it's all now extensively built over. You will know from the satellite images, and certainly if you've been to the site, that the modern buildings, roads, modern infrastructure comes right up to the Valley Temple of Khafra and runs roughshod right over the harbour area. So it's been surveyed, and again, that's from a landscape point of view. We can see that those two villages, Nazlet El Batran and Nazlet El Sisi, are on higher ground, and that's it's thought that they possibly are either cause or effect of there being a natural kind of entranceway to the innermost harbour. So in other words, at the time of Khufu, there were areas of higher ground at the point of the mouth of the harbour, and on one side of that was probably where the office of Ankh was, and the modern villages are the successors to the buildings that were in those spots. So from that point of view, that aspect of the archaeology survives, but obviously not the buildings themselves, and the whole area is swallowed up. And says, gee whiz, this is such an awesome presentation. So appreciative. Thank you very much, Anne. I love to read that sort of thing. Thanks. Angel Great says, didn't Unas reuse panels of Khufu's temple at Giza to use as walls of his burial chamber and antechamber? You can see traces of the old decoration. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I know that you can see traces of earlier decoration in the Unas burial chamber, specifically the image of Pharaoh running the Hepsed, which is only visible if you shine a raking light across it. If you've been to the tomb, you might know that party trick that the Guardians do. I didn't know that there was any evidence it was from Khufu's temples, though. That's very interesting. I will follow that up. Thanks. Anne says, if Khufu's body had the hundreds of ornaments like Tut's had, all through various levels of wrapping, would it have been quicker for thieves to just take the mummy and disaggregate valuables elsewhere? Yeah. So again, I didn't go into this. What I was really hoping actually was that I had an image. One has to be careful about showing images of human remains, but I hope you won't mind if I just describe this to you. When I worked in Theban tomb number 37, the tomb of Harwa, about 20 years ago, that tomb was originally the burial place, we think, of high official of the 25th dynasty, 25th maybe into the 26th dynasty. But it was also subsequently reused, as all these monumental tombs were in later times. And we had an intrusive secondary burial there of an articulated body, a mummified body, which was reasonably well preserved. So the body intact with the wrappings, and at the wrist there was, well, the hand was missing, and there was a clear diagonal cut just above the wrist on the lower arm here, like this, and then beyond that everything was missing. So we assume that what happened was that the mummy was buried with some jewelry around the wrist, or maybe some rings or something like that. And the robber's solution to, or the easiest way of getting at the treasure was simply to hack the hand off and walk off with it. But you're right that the wrappings would have contained various goodies, jewelry, etc. And we know from the tomb of Tutankhamun that they wanted things that could be recycled, so precious metals, oils, unguents, those kinds of things. Those are the kinds of things that you can reuse. You can't reuse, say, faience. It can't be melted down. You can only break it. You can't really do anything with it. Ceramics are the same. Precious metals are not only very valuable, but they can be melted down, quickly and easily, and then you can sell them on without anybody knowing that they had been a part of a king's burial equipment. So jewelry is great because it's made of the right stuff, and it's also very portable. So that's why we think that linen bundle that was found in the tomb of Tut was most probably the result of a robber having gathered some things up very quickly and then been caught. The problem with knowing what there might have been in the pyramid of Khufu is that it's difficult to overstate just how unusual the tomb of Tutankhamun is. I mentioned that intact burials are vanishingly rare. That's true. We've got more than just that one, but there are hardly any. And to my knowledge, again, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, we've got pretty much nothing from the period of the 4th dynasty. The ones that spring to mind are all sort of Theban, Middle and New Kingdom burials. I hope somebody will be able to tell me if there's an intact elite burial of the sort of 4th dynasty. I guess there are intact burials in mastabas. In fact, early dynastic mastabas, places like Saqqara. They certainly didn't in those cases contain anything like the treasure that King Tut has got, and I think the likelihood is that King Tut is probably anomalous, actually. Not just in that it was intact, but the treasures were so sensational. I think that might be an interesting subject for a talk, maybe. Intact burials. Mental note made. Okay, folks, I think I'm going to do a couple more questions that I'm going to see if I can pick out, and then I think I'm going to have to leave you. Thanks again so much for sticking around as long as you have. I've enjoyed the chat here. Ladondorf says, could you do a lecture on the layout of the Valley of the King's Tombs, going over each room's intended function, decoration, and how the funerary equipment might have been arranged? Yes, I will. It's been in my mind to do something like that anyway, so I'll put it on the queue. Yeah, thank you. That's a great suggestion. I would like to do that. It's sad that robbers would rather burn the mummy instead of trying to unwrap it. Yeah, another phenomenon that we see in the evidence that we have from tomb robberies is that, as I was just saying, with the hand being chopped off, robbers seem to have been absolutely merciless. But I guess there's a kind of economic imperative in there. If you're poor and desperate enough, maybe, or I don't know. Who knows what they were thinking? But we always think that the Egyptians were very reverent, don't we, of the dead, and perhaps for the most part they were, but they certainly weren't all like that. Hello, Martin. Rumor has it the area to the east of the pyramid will be evicted and the people relocated. It would be interesting if the harbour can be located. Any information on that? That's new to me, Martin. I didn't know that. Wow, that would be amazing. I mean, I guess the basalt, I think, pavement that was discovered, which is thought to be the remains of the Khufu Valley Temple. I guess that's still there. You know, detected when they would put the trenches in for the waterworks, but presumably left in situ. I don't know how far it extends either. I don't suppose anybody knows that. Who knows? Interesting. Yeah, if you hear anything more about that, please let me know. Right, last couple, folks. I'm seeing a couple of more very generous buy me a coffee type contributions. Thanks so much, Shlomo. Thank you, Phil. Hello, Phil. Good to see you here. Leonardo says Heteperes, mother. Hi, Leonardo. Good to have you here too. Heteperes was discovered undisturbed. Yes, you're quite right. How could I forget that? That's something else I could have talked about and didn't. Yes, you're right. Maybe that's another subject for a undisturbed tombs kind of talk. Usa says, on whose payroll is Dr. Norton? I'm freelance. I'm self-employed. I left the establishment of Egyptology, in fact, in order to be self-employed, be my own boss. I don't know if that's a loaded question. Glenn says he works for a charitable foundation. That's also true. Yes, it is. I work for the Robert Anderson Research Charitable Trust. It's not a full-time job, but yes. And as a freelancer, thank you, Leonardo. Thank you all filling in the info here. Okay, I'm so sorry that I haven't been able to deal with all of your questions here, but thank you so much for sticking with it, those of you who have, and thank you for sticking, even to those of you who are not still here but watched the whole talk. Thank you so much. You'll know, those of you who've heard me speak before, that I always overrun. I always try not to. But even I knew that I was going to overrun today, and I hope you feel that it was worth it. There were so many things that I wanted to cover and couldn't. But as we've just been saying, maybe those are just ideas for future talks. So thanks again for coming. Really appreciate it. Thank you all. Alabaster members, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate that. Thank you for those of you who have made little contributions via the thanks button or super thanks or stickers or whatever it is. I think it's different in different countries, isn't it? Which is partly why I never really know what's going on for you all. But thank you for doing that too. Recording is going to be online straight away, I think. Do share this with anybody else you think might be interested. Next talk is early September. I think it's the 7th. I should know that, shouldn't I? I think it's the 7th of September. How to read hieroglyphs. We'll be looking at the Abydos king lists. We had a quick look at them earlier on in this talk. We'll be looking at them in more detail next month. Stay tuned. Take care. Look after yourselves. Enjoy the, I was going to say sunshine, but it's gone all gloomy here. And I'll see you again soon. Okay. Bye for now. Thanks, everyone. Bye.